Welcome to Identified.
Talking to my grandparents about these stories made me realize that these histories actually haven't really been documented because the people writing the histories of World War I or even partition, the way that we learn about it in the West and in England specifically, is written by the English.
Right.
So you hear that story and you don't know that it was like a complete genocide. And, you know, I learned that my relatives who fought in World War I, one of them, when he came back from serving in Iraq, he was injured in the war, so he couldn't do anything else. And he was put on like a veteran pension dished out by the British. And it was like something insane, like 2 rupees a year, or I don't know, something right. Just like nothing.
Unlivable, yeah.
He was destitute and then reliant on the family to look after him.
Hello, I'm Nabil Ayers, author, music executive, and host of Identified, the podcast that delves deep into the complex world of family and identity. In this episode, my guest is Nabihah Iqbal, who is not only an accomplished musician, but also a scholar of world history. During the pandemic, Nabihah and her mother spent an unplanned 2 months together at their family home in Pakistan. Naturally, as a historian would, she spent that time excavating her own fascinating family history. I spoke with Nabihah at South by Southwest in Austin, toward the end of her months-long tour. During our interview, she shared a compelling reflection on how the diversity of her audience shifted from city to city, prompting her to think deeply about the universal truths and unique societal constructs that define each culture. Here's my conversation with Nabihah.
I'm the oldest of 6 kids.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, we have a big family, but growing up, there's quite a big gap in the kids. So that for a while, it was just like 3 of us, 3 sisters, and we're all like 2 years apart, basically. And so it was like that for a while. And then my parents had 3 more kids. So it's really like the A team and the B team. And we still call the little ones, even though the youngest is now 20. I think.
So everyone's grown now.
So 20 or 21. Oh my God, that's bad. I can't remember. I think she's 21.
That's a lot of people to remember.
Yeah, 21. Yeah, so that's it. So 6 kids and just grew up. We were all born in London, grew up in central London. It's funny when there's 6 of you, it's like different dynamics between all the different siblings.
Yeah, what are the relationships like with all of them?
Overall, it's good, but obviously like anyone who's got like brothers and sisters will know that sometimes it's like it gets a bit heated or people have arguments, but that's just part of it. And actually it's just good conditioning for life, I think, because I'm not saying this in like a critical way, but I feel like you can often tell the difference between someone who's grown up as an only child and someone who's grown up, whatever that means. But I think like it's a different experience when you grow up with brothers and sisters around you.
Right.
And like, for example, it's different when you're the oldest sibling compared to the youngest, and then the middle ones. Everyone's got their own different perspectives.
Is there a point where everyone was in the house at the same time? Was it ever that crowded?
Yeah, there would have been a point, when my youngest sister was born, I was 15. So, you know, that time, everyone's in the house.
I mean, it
was intense.
And you must remember it very well, being 15. Yeah, it was pretty crowded.
Yeah. And just like, I was a teenager, I was going out loads. I think my parents were also, because I was the oldest kid, so I definitely had it the hardest.
Right.
In terms of like just being allowed to do stuff. You know, I never did anything bad. I've never drank or done drugs or anything like that. The main thing for me was like going out for music because it's my favorite thing. So I was just wanting to go to gigs every night and, you know, even on a school night and all this kind of stuff, and just being out every weekend just to go and watch loads of shows. So when I think about like how my parents reacted to me doing that compared to how they are with like my younger siblings now, especially my brother, the first of the 2 brothers, who's also really into music, and he gets away with murder compared to me. But I think that's like a learning process for parents too. So because I was the first one, it was different. And with them, either they've really just given up because it's too many like.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard. I mean, I'm an only child, but every story I've ever heard is that it's hardest for the older child, and it gets easier as they get younger.
Yeah, and then I'm like, it's not fair.
So did they stop you from going to shows sometimes, or not let you do everything you wanted to do?
There were a couple of times, where, I don't know, my dad would be angry at me and just not let me go out.
Oh.
And then, but then there were also times where I'd have definitely like snuck out.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't even know if I should
They're going to notice if one's missing.
They'll know. Yeah, I mean, and then I got in trouble for that as well. So, but it's fine.
Yeah. Were your parents generally supportive of music, though, of your interest? And were you playing music at that age?
Yeah, I was playing music at that age. My parents really pushed all of us to just do as much as possible. So obviously, like, pushed hard on the academic side. And I feel like anyone who's got immigrant parents or in a white world will understand that, because I feel like education is really a priority for people from like a different ethnic background, like when you're trying to make it. So that was always a big thing. And then apart from that, they were really conscious about trying to make us do as much extracurricular activities as possible. So we did a lot of sport, we did a lot of music, we like always had a lot of after school clubs, weekend things. I went to music school every Saturday. Me and my sisters, we were all learning a lot of instruments. So yeah, I was thinking about that the other day actually, like my parents putting up with all of us practicing in the house. And there was a time when I was playing the oboe, which is like quite an intense instrument. My younger sister was playing the bassoon and the other sister was playing the saxophone, and it would have just been like the most cacophonous sounding
like
household.
The Guitar Center on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. Oh my God. So they put up with that as well. But so yeah, they made that sacrifice.
That's really
But yeah,
fun.
there was always a lot of music, but they never, I don't think they would have ever imagined that I would be pursuing it as a career. Like that wasn't really on the cards.
Right.
And I didn't even think it was either. And so music was always my favorite thing growing up. Always like playing instruments, being in orchestra, going to like music clubs, music school, whatever. And then I also, when I went to university, my undergraduate degree, I did joint honours in history and ethnomusicology. So I studied at a university as well. And then the whole way through uni, I was like still doing a lot of music, and my friends were all really into music. So then we started putting on parties together and start learning how to DJ, and also just messing around on GarageBand on my computer, just, you know, trying to work out like how can you make music or edit a track on a computer. And then that just like kind of progressed. But I did a lot of studying. After I graduated from my undergrad degree, that was from the University of London, but it was a very specialist college called the School of Oriental and African Studies. And it's one of the only places, maybe it's the only place in the UK that specialises in learning about everything like that's not Europe. Like if you want to learn subjects from a non-Eurocentric perspective, that's where you go. And it's got a real like reputation for that.
Oh, wow.
And it's a very lefty institution.
Yeah.
And then I finished there, and then I went to Cambridge, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of like politics, and did a master's specialising in African history. And then after that I did law, so like a fast track law degree in 2 years, and the bar as well. So I was like on this quite like hardcore academic route, and then following law as a career. And I got called to the bar, and I thought I was going to be a barrister. I was working in law for a little while as well, but along all of that, always doing music on the side. And then it just started gaining its own momentum. And then when I finally decided to focus on music full time and not do law, then obviously my parents were like, no.
You've done so much work.
Yeah.
But they must be, are they happy to see all the success you've had?
Yeah, I think so.
Do they see it as that? I mean...
Yeah, they do. I think like it's been different between my mum and my dad. My mum's been at like every single show that she can be at. Sometimes she comes on tour with me as well.
Oh.
And that's been good. But my dad actually came to watch me perform for the first time ever just last year. In New York, actually. And it was my first ever show in New York, and I was there with my whole band, and it was sold out as well. And it was at a venue called Public Records, which is really nice. That's a good one for parents to be at.
Right.
So that was the first time he saw me play, and my mum was there as well, and two of my siblings, so it was like a good family turnout. And for me, it was a special show. It was the last show on my first ever America tour. First show in New York, sold out, like solid crowd. And yeah, so that night felt really special for loads of different reasons.
Yeah. Do you remember his reaction, like that when you saw him for the first time after? Were you nervous?
I was a bit nervous, actually, yeah. And I remember saying on the stage that I was happy he was there and that it was his first time
Wow.
coming to see me. And yeah, my dad he's not like always that open about like maybe feelings or being like, yeah, that was really good. But I think he was happy, yeah.
Yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah.
Where did your parents immigrate from?
Pakistan.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both Pakistani.
First generation.
Yeah.
So they wanted you to write to sort of work harder than maybe everyone else had to. Was it that kind of feeling?
Well, I mean, I just think that is literally the reality.
Yeah.
If you are not white and you're living in a white country, by default, you have to work harder than everyone else to prove you. Like, the bar is always higher. It's still that way. And I think it's the same whoever you speak to, and it doesn't matter what job. Like, it could be, you know, like a kind of menial labor job, or it could be in government, or like law or banking or teaching. It doesn't even matter. Like, whatever sphere you're in, you always have to do more to prove yourself. And there's always like a lot of people ready to criticize you for the smallest thing. And standards are definitely different.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like that in everything.
Does music feel like that to you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think with music, or maybe with me personally, you know, there's a lot of elements which make me different from the status quo. So the first thing is, when you look at me, I'm female, I'm brown, then it's about the background, then it's about, like, you know, the music industry is so male dominated and still white male dominated. So yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, I think it's the best time to be me in terms of just where we're at in the world. And like the trajectory of sort of like progress of equality and understanding and acceptance and tolerance and respect and all of those things. We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to be done. And also, there's difficult situations and there's things that happen to me where I'm like, okay, I know why this has happened, or I know why this person's reacting to me in this way. But I just try not to dwell on it, because I get asked this question a lot, you know, like, oh, how does it feel to be a woman or to be a brown woman doing music, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, there's going to be things that you have to deal with, and there's going to be difficult times and things that make you feel frustrated. But it's easy. The easiest thing to do is play the victim and sit around and like complain about it, or even just like dwell on the negativity, but that's not going to get you anywhere. So, you know, all of that exists, but I'd rather put my energy into my work and my own kind of personal journey or progression, whatever that is. And then that's better, because people see that.
Yeah. And
the people who care about you and love your work and your creative output, they're with you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough sometimes.
That's the world.
Yeah.
So your parents, how far back in your family line can you go? Do you know a lot about your ancestors? Did you know your grandparents?
I haven't been able to go really far back, but I would like to, because, you know, I love history as well. And I love, like, to know more about your family, I think is a really special thing. Not everyone has that.
Yeah.
I haven't done loads of research. Well, I knew my grandparents on both sides, and on my mum's side, my grandparents are both still alive. Oh, wow. And I'm really, really close to them. I spent a lot of time with them growing up, and I visit them as much as I can. I try and go to Pakistan at least once a year.
Oh, great.
And I've been, you know, as a child you go with your family, but since I was at university, I've been going by myself, just because I want to visit them. And I also never want to feel like a complete outsider in Pakistan, because that is my motherland. I know more about my mum's side of my family than my dad's side. On my mum's side, and like on my grandfather and grandmother's side, I know that I've got relatives who both served in World War I, like fighting for the British side. I know about their experiences and how messed up it was. I've learned a bit about my grandparents going through partition in 1947, which is the creation of Pakistan, like separate to India, and then also Bangladesh. I found out that my great-grandfather, who I never met, but I really wish I could have, because he just sounds like such a legend. This is my maternal granddad's father. He just seemed like such a cool person, because, I mean, he did a lot of different things. He was living between Lahore and then also Delhi. At the time, there was no border between the two cities. And he also, like, at the top of the most wanted list by the British for being a rebel against the empire in India.
Oh, wow.
And he was part of this kind of insurgents, anti-imperialist movement called the Khilafat movement. He was like, I've heard stories about him, and there's like been news articles about him as well, I think, from, you know, back in the day. I need to find out more, but I just know that he was like on the British like colonialists' most wanted list for people that were like causing a ruckus. Yeah, like part of his movie, I learned stories about like, so, you know, obviously when you were, let's say, yeah, everyone was classed as Indian then, and like kind of fighting against the imperialist powers that ruled over the Indian subcontinent, England. It was hard to do things, and obviously like so many people were just like massacred, just killed for no reason on the streets. There was no justice. They had like a system of transporting like secret messages, because you'd be like strip searched and stuff. So my granddad and my great uncle were telling me that one way of doing it was that like people would like shave their heads and they would write the message on the scalp in henna and then let the hair grow back for a few days. And then like if they had to like transport some information or something, right. And then like, yeah, they'd like go to the next place and shave their head, and like stuff would be on it. Yeah, like different things.
That's incredible.
And then he went into hiding in Afghanistan, and he had to like sneak back across the border in secret, because if the British rulers had known that he was back in India, I don't know, he would have definitely got arrested or killed or something.
Yeah.
And he came back to his village and had like a hero's welcome. I don't know, I just hear these snippets, you know. So for me, like, he's a really interesting character and I'd like to know more about him.
Of course.
And then I know my two great uncles, I think, were both soldiers in World War I. One of them served in Mesopotamia, Iraq, and one of them was serving in Europe. And I hear stories from my grandparents about how they were treated. It's deep, because talking to my grandparents about these stories made me realize that these histories actually haven't really been documented, because the people writing the histories of World War I, or even partition, the way that we learn about it in the West and in England specifically, is written by the English.
Right.
So you hear that story and you don't know that it was like a complete genocide. And, you know, I learned that my relatives who fought in World War I, one of them, when he came back from serving in Iraq, he was injured in the war, so he couldn't do anything else. And he was put on like a veteran pension dished out by the British. And it was like something insane, like 2 rupees a year. Or, I don't know, something just like nothing.
Unlivable, yeah.
He was destitute and then reliant on the family to look after him. And the other story I heard about my relative who was fighting in Europe, they were traveling through, like marching through Italy or something, or somewhere, and they were all starving and really thirsty, and got to a village and asked for food, and the reply was like, well, the dogs haven't eaten first, so they need to eat first and then we'll see what's left. And this is not made up stuff, you know, like when I'm hearing this passed down through my family, it's like, why would someone make this up? This is actually the true lived experience of all the soldiers. I mean, there were 4 million soldiers fighting for the British side in World War I, and 1 million of them came from India, and mostly from like northern India and Punjab, that whole area, which is also now Pakistan. So that's like a huge contingent.
Yeah.
And then I only found out about these stories because I was working on a music project where the task was to make a piece of work based on like a section of World War I history. So I'd chosen to look at the experience of black and brown soldiers fighting on the Western Front in World War I. And it was, for me, it was a perfect project because it melded my 2 loves of music and history. But that's when I started doing the research, then I went to my grandparents and I was like, oh, I'm reading about this. Like, do you know if there were people in our family who were part of this? Because all the soldiers came from the areas where my family came from. And then I found that out. I was reading letters that were written by Indian soldiers fighting in Europe, and also I was reading letters that were written by West African soldiers as well, who were coming from places like Nigeria and the Congo. Those things that I read, like, they were difficult to read.
Yeah.
They were really difficult to read because it's so moving and sad, and also like someone who's studied like 2 history degrees in England, and you go through that part and then you realise, wow, like, these people have been written out.
Right, you still don't
They've been
know.
written out.
Yeah.
And you don't, when you watch any World War I film especially, it's just like whitewashed. When you actually look into the history of it, you realise that all the frontline soldiers, the first people to go over the trenches, were the brown and black soldiers, because their lives was deemed less worthy. But I still have yet to see any of that depicted.
Right.
So...
And it's incredible that you don't get this information until you need to ask, or until you decide to ask. That's something I really regret. I knew my grandparents on my mother's side well into my 20s, but I never really sat with them and said, tell me everything. And I really wish I had. And you had a reason to, which obviously opened all these really interesting doors.
We find out those stories because we're curious, and they have a direct impact on us because they're part of our family stories. And also when your own lived experience is so entrenched with like who you are and what you look like, then those things are more poignant to you.
Yeah.
And if you never have to think about it because it's completely irrelevant to your life, then you'll probably never learn those things.
Right.
But those maybe are the people who need to know about it the most.
Yeah.
And so then you think like history is taught in a certain way, because I think, you know, the way history is taught in any country, like it's one of the most powerful tools for just creating whatever kind of reputation or like nationalist sentiment that you want to create, whatever the country is.
Yeah, it's a big thing here,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you know.
I mean, yeah, like sitting here in America and having that conversation.
Yeah.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot since I've been here, because this is the longest time I've spent in America in one go, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, I saw your post about a show you just played somewhere else in Texas, right?
Yeah,
that was
in McAllen.
pretty fascinating and touching, I
Yeah. Yeah, we played a show a few days ago in a city called McAllen, which is right on the border with Mexico. And I've never been to that part of the States before. I've never been so close to Mexico before.
There's parts where you can see across and see that the lighting is different. Like
Really?
you can be that close and see like, oh, they have a different power grid.
Yeah.
And it's not as good, of course.
Yeah, and exactly. And we were like right there. I had no idea what it was going to be like, but it was a very, very like special show for me that I'm not going to forget, because on the stage, when I looked out at the audience, I could just see this like, everyone was brown, like it was just a sea of brown faces. And I thought, wow, like I'm actually playing a show in America where the people who are here are actually indigenous to this land. And these are like the real Americans.
Yeah.
You know, traveling around the States, you hardly see any Native American people. Even, you know, I see more in Canada. It's interesting because this kind of last leg of touring that I've been on, it's kind of been a bit of a settler colonialism tour, because it went through like Australia and then New Zealand and then America,
right.
and Canada and then back to America. And these are all places where the English went and changed the total makeup of those countries. Going there now, like 2023, 2024, with everything that's also happening in the world at the moment, it's been fascinating to go through each country and seeing each country's relationship to their history, because every place has been very different. And then when you get to America, you're just like, people hardly exist anymore, the people who this land actually belongs to.
Right, and especially at indie rock clubs.
Yeah, but then in McAllen, everyone there was from there. I said something about it on the stage because I just found it quite emotional. It was very special, and it felt like, you know, if history had been different and the 99% of the actual population of this country hadn't been completely massacred, you'd go around America and play gigs, and that's the kind of crowd that you'd see everywhere, to be honest. And then just thinking about like being so close to the Mexican border and how that's just such an arbitrary line, because it was just put there by people who aren't from here, and just carving up communities and history and culture that straddles now both sides. And it's the same in Pakistan and India. It's the same thing that happened. You just think about it more as you grow up. I had like some quite deep reflections on it during lockdown, because that whole time, like that was when I was trying to make my album, and a lot of things got in the way and happened. And there's one of the worst things that happened was that in 2020, just before the first big lockdown started, my studio got burgled and I lost all my work. Like 2 years worth of music, because I hadn't backed it up. I was really in shock. I was like, oh my God, really? Like the whole album? And then I had to start again. So there's this moment where I just couldn't function, like I was just distraught. And then the day after the burglary, I was literally in my studio with a forensic police officer who's taking fingerprints. And then I got a FaceTime call from my grandma, and she was crying, and I was like, whoa, what's happened? And she told me that my grandfather had a brain hemorrhage and he was in hospital in Pakistan. And he's my favourite person in the world. So then me and my mum, we like just both dropped everything, got like last minute flights, and like left the next day to go out to Pakistan. Luckily he was okay and he came back. But that moment, it was like a crystallizing moment for me, because I was so kind of wrapped up in the loss of my work and the burglary. And then as soon as I found out about my granddad, that situation just eclipsed everything else. Because it really makes you realize like, okay, what are the things that are actually the most important and that you really care about. And suddenly I wasn't thinking about the studio situation. All I was thinking about was my grandfather. And then my mum and I went out there. It was supposed to be like a 2-week trip. And then the day we were supposed to fly back, Pakistani government announced a strict lockdown. They just shut down everything, like all the roads, the stations, airports, everything. So we ended up being there for 2 months. And in that time, that's the longest time I've spent, not only with my grandparents, but even with my mum, like since being an adult.
Of course.
And it made me think about a lot of things. And I feel like, everyone had their own experience of lockdown, which made them think about things in a different way. And probably realizing what family means. And to all the people who lost members of their family to COVID, or who missed like big moments because they couldn't get to each other. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it made like millions of people around the world think about what it means to be a part of something, and like who are the people that are most important to you. That definitely did something in my mind in terms of thinking about family and realizing that it is the most important. And I think also as you get older, and you just think about like your own kind of nuclear family, whatever that is, whether for you, it's you and your mum. For me, it's like my parents and all my siblings. And, earlier I was speaking about like getting into trouble for wanting to go out too much and my parents getting angry at me and all that stuff. And when you're a teenager, it's like, it can feel like a lot of friction. But then when you come out of that and as you get older, you start to learn more about your parents. You start to learn about their own life experiences and how that might affect the way they treat us, or like the way they control their emotions or don't control their emotions or whatever. But it makes sense. And so what does family mean to me? It's just the feeling that I feel the most is like just gratefulness. Because sometimes things don't make sense to you and you're like, oh, why? Everyone's so annoying. When you're a teenager, you're like, everyone's so annoying. Why is my mum being like that? Why is my dad being like that? Then you get older and you just realize like, okay, it's actually hard for parents too. And what my parents would have had to go through in order for me to be able to now just do music as a career and make that choice, that comes from my parents sacrificing a lot.
Right.
And when you realize that and start to think about that more, it's like quite powerful.
Yeah, you need some age and hindsight to appreciate those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And be sure to check out Identified on YouTube and identifiedpod.com, where you can watch videos from our interviews. Our executive producer is Kieron Banerji, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.